Welcome back to Buckeye Bigfoot. Hi everyone, tonight I've got something a little different for you. We're going to do a triple header of 3 emails that I've received. Now, normally I like to build these emails into immersive stories for you. But I'm getting some feedback that you also like the straight read emails, so I thought I would just give you a few tonight. And also, I just wanted to say, while I really like putting the fun videos together that follow a story for you whenever I can, I'm sorry, but that just hasn't been possible lately, and certainly not this week due to other commitments. But hopefully soon I can spend more time giving you guys eye candy. Okay, the first email this week comes from Kelsey, whose encounter was very recent and just happened this summer. Okay, here we go. My fiance and myself were stargazing at the Wilderness Center in Wilmot, Ohio. We had went with plans of having a relaxing evening, which didn't turn out so well. This was July 17th, 2019. We had our usual picnic just before dawn, and the sky was to be clear, perfect for stargazing. We went about our meal and then continued down the trail. As night fell, we started to hear a strange knocking, almost like rocks being thrown against trees. My fiancé got spooked immediately, so we started up the path back to our car, which was about a quarter mile away, since we had wandered off hiking, as we frequently do. Then we heard a few strange screams, and we started to move a bit quicker. We had no inclination of what it was. It was just like the start of a horror movie. As we got closer to the car, we heard breaking of branches and the smell of something that wasn't so pleasant. When we got inside of our vehicle, we immediately started trying to open it from afar, knowing that something wasn't right. As we had almost got to the vehicle, it showed itself behind us. Standing about 7.5 feet tall with brownish-gray fur, it let out such a guttural growl at us that I can't begin to say how scary this was. There's no words for it. It was about 3 a.m. It was in sight for at least 5 solid seconds. Needless to say, we left in a hurry. We heard another scream as we pulled away. Love your channel. Hope you get to read this one. Thanks much, Kelsey. Wow, thank you, Kelsey, for sharing your experience with us. I don't know. I love reports of the Bigfoot with the brownish gray or gray fur. I think they're pretty unusual. Okay. Moving on, the next email comes from Stan, and this just popped up in my email earlier this week, and while Stan doesn't say when this happened, I decided rather than waiting for replies from him and back and forth emails, that I was just going to go ahead and share it with you as I now have it. So here goes. When we retired, we were finally able to buy the house out in country that we always wanted. Let's just say we were somewhere between Mosquito Creek Lake and the Wild River Wildlife Area. Anyway, we had a small dog named Coco that often tried to run off whenever the door was opened. She wasn't allowed out except on a leash, but every now and then she would get out and start running. One night she did just that. She's a tiny dog, part Bichon Frise and I don't know what else, but she is a runner. My wife and I split up in the cars and started driving around to look for her. We weren't exactly young enough to go running after her, so we drove up and down looking for her and calling her name. I slowed down through the area as I thought I heard Coco's yaps from somewhere. I thought I heard her again, so I pulled over and got out and was standing next to the car, and I yelled her name a couple times and stopped to listen for her. I heard brush moving across the road, and I was expecting her to come bounding out of the trees, but what came out was actually 3 deer. They were running like lightning as if a hunter was flushing them out. They darted across the road and into the field on the other side, and seemed to be heading for the island of trees beyond the field. I watched them for a second, then turned back to the other side of the road with the trees, hoping that maybe it was Coco yipping and chasing them, and that was what had scared them. But it wasn't Coco that came out of the trees. It was a Bigfoot. There is no doubt that that is what I saw. It sprinted across the road less than 20 feet away from where I stood next to the car. I want to say this was almost broad daylight, maybe 5:30 in the afternoon, so it was clear visibility. Anyway, yeah, I was startled, but I wasn't scared. It just barreled across the road and into the field after the deer. But once in the open field, I saw that Bigfoot was gaining fast on the deer. It all happened very quickly, but it was perfectly clear to me in the broad daylight. I think I stood there maybe 10 seconds or more, watching and waiting. I had been stunned first by seeing a Bigfoot at all, and then again when I saw its speed out in the field. I cannot tell you how fast that thing was. I got back in my car and started to head home in the hopes that my wife had found Coco. I did not want to be out here after dark looking for her, but if I had to, of course I would. I don't remember driving home. I must have been on autopilot. I was pretty shook up. I was very relieved to find that my wife had found Coco and was already home with her. Yes, we are extra careful with Coco now whenever we open the door. I never want her to be loose out there. I know her tiny legs could never outrun a Bigfoot. Thanks for letting me share this with you. Stan. All right, my SAS squad, we are up to email number 3, and this comes from Stacie, who had her encounter in Knox County. When I was a young kid, back in the early 1990s, my mom was dating a real jerk of a guy. Anyway, we ended up living there for the better part of the year at his house. The house was set back from the road a bit and was surrounded in an L shape of heavy trees to the right and the back of the house, and the other side opened out to a field. Now the jerk tried to tell us that all of that was his land, and he tried to act like he was some big farmer, but he wasn't. He was busted broke and never seemed to do much of anything, certainly not farming. So this is one of the reasons I never believed anything he said. So when he told me if I didn't stay near the house that the Grassman would get me, I was literally thinking he was just telling another big fat lie. They were his specialty. Anyway, I didn't even know what the Grassman was at that time. So he told me it was basically Bigfoot, which was something I was kind of aware of. Anyway, he described the Grassman for us, more so for my mom, who did not really know what a Bigfoot was. It didn't matter. We didn't really believe any of his tales about it anyway. So late one afternoon, Mom and the jerk headed into Danville to get some groceries, and I stayed at the house. I was back out in the covered freestanding swing that sat a little way away from the house between 2 big shade trees. I was reading a book, as I recall. I liked sitting out there because I could get a breeze out there, and it was hard to get one in the house. Anyway, the way the swing was positioned, it looked out toward the L shape of trees to the right and to the back of the house, and I was sitting with my back mostly to the open field. Every now and then the breeze would come in from the direction of the trees, and boy did it stink. I didn't give it too much thought, as you do smell all kinds of things out in the country. The last time we were overcome with a real stinky smell, we found out that someone had poached a deer maybe 10 yards inside the trees by the back of the house. They had gutted it and left all the rest there to sit and rot in the summer heat. So I really didn't overthink what I was smelling at that point. But it was getting later, and Mom and the jerk still weren't back yet. The sun was going down, so I headed into the house, as I never liked being out there alone when it started to get dark. I had been in the house maybe 10 minutes or so when I noticed the awful smell was getting stronger. It was a nice evening, and most of the windows were open, again hoping for a breeze that never showed up. And I didn't feel a breeze, but the scent was filling up the whole house. I couldn't stand it, so I started going around to close the windows. I'd rather have to explain to Mom and the jerk why I had the air conditioner running than smell whatever that smell was. When I walked over to the window above the kitchen sink, the smell was almost unbearable. I remember I raised my arm to close the window when I suddenly caught eye shine and some kind of movement just outside the window. I remember reflexively screaming and pulling my arm away. It's kind of like that thing you do when you see someone standing there when you didn't expect anyone to be there. After about 2 seconds, it hit me. Someone's out there, and the sliding patio door was only a few feet away from the end of the kitchen cabinets near where I was, and it was wide open, with only the screen door between me and whoever was stalking the house. So yeah, I did the horror movie thing and grabbed the big kitchen knife before creeping over to slam the sliding door shut and lock it. The next 20 or 30 minutes till Mom and the jerk came home were some of the longest I have ever known. None of us had cell phones back then, so I had no way of calling them, and I was too afraid to call the sheriff's department on my own. I had been made well aware that the very last thing that jerk wanted was any sort of law enforcement on that property, ever. Let's just say the few things he did do weren't always very legal, so I knew better than to call. Anyway, when they got home, I told them what had happened. Of course the jerk laughed and told me the Grassman was out to get me for real, and the 15-year-old I wasn't sure whether to believe him or not. My mom told him to knock it off and take it seriously. By this point, she was getting worried too. Now, this was a good hour after the incident had occurred, before the jerk finally went outside and looked around. Then he did something really weird. He started urinating all around that corner of the house. He said he was remarking his territory, and that awful smell, which was still very much hanging around, by the way, that was where the Grassman had urinated on the house. He swore he had caught him doing it one time, and that ever since they'd been doing this weird battle over and over again. But like I said, I didn't really believe him. I thought he was putting on some kind of weird show. But I would believe him very shortly. Just a few days later, Mom and I were sitting outside at that cheap plastic patio table sitting in the grass, waiting for the jerk to come home from work so we could start having dinner. I suddenly became aware my mom wasn't listening or talking to me anymore, and she was looking past me and past my shoulder over to the trees. I turned in the chair to see what she was looking at, and I couldn't believe it. It was the Grassman, or something that looked exactly like the Grassman that the jerk had described to me. The setting sun was shining directly on it, so that even though it was back a few trees in the wooded area, it was very visible. It was dark-colored, not black, but maybe a shade away from it, or maybe it just seemed like it with the sun shining toward it. At 15, I was no judge of distance, but now as an adult, I'll take a stab at it and say it was about 30 yards from where we were sitting. It wasn't doing anything but looking at us. The next thing I knew, my mother was pulling me out of the chair and pushing me into the house, where we closed and locked everything up until the jerk got home, which was 20 minutes later or so. We both told him what we saw, and of course he laughed at us and said, "Yep, that's him. He comes around from time to time. Don't worry. He mostly comes in the summer and the fall." That didn't make me or Mom feel better. I told Mom I didn't want to be there anymore. I told her I was scared, but I didn't have any say in the matter about where we lived. A few weeks later, I was awakened to the sound of something hitting the house. I was panicked and not sure what I was hearing. The next thing I know, I smelled that awful stink again, even though the house was all closed up. I saw the light come on in Mom and the jerk's bedroom across the hall. Then something hit the house again a few times. I was scared, and I ran into their room. Again, the jerk laughed and said it was just the Grassman, and he's done this before, and told me to go back to bed and forget about it. I didn't want to, so Mom let me sleep with them in their bed. In the morning, it was clear that something very big and very heavy had been out along the side of the house. While there were no clear footprints, all the grass was heavily trampled. But the weird thing was that a bush had been pulled up from around the foundation of the house, and it looked as if it was the bush that had been hitting the side of the house. The bush was pulverized, there were green markings on the siding of the house, and all around were leaves where they had fallen. But the one encounter I want to tell you about is the closest encounter that I had with the creature, and it was more face-to-face than any of them up to that point. Again, we were in the kitchen. My mother and I were cooking dinner one night. Now it was fall, and the outdoor lights had already kicked on because the sun set early. I remember I was standing at the sink peeling potatoes. I was talking to Mom, and I had just glanced up out the window. There it was. It was standing there, and it was looking in the window at me. Unlike the last time when it was too dark to see much of anything outside, this time I saw all the facial features very clearly. The back porch lights were shining almost directly on it. The thing had a wide face, and the eyes, they were very round, not at all like a human eye shape. The eyes were really black. I didn't see any iris or any of the things that a human eye has. They were also set really wide on the face and very deep in the eye sockets. The nose was flat and had weird rippled skin at the bottom for nostrils. The head shape was not the high dome like I've seen in pictures, but it did slant away from the forehead. My mom said later that I was just standing there at the sink, frozen. I hadn't answered her about something, so she looked over to me, saw me frozen, then glanced out the window to see what I was looking at. I don't remember it, but she says she grabbed my arm and dragged me to the hallway for safety. When the jerk got home, Mom told him everything. He did believe us, of course, but he still didn't think any of it was a big deal. I don't know why he was so blasé about it all. Me and Mom were scared to death. It was coming up close to the house a lot. Too much. That weekend, we packed up and moved back in with some of Mom's friends who lived in Danville. She knew how scared I was, and she was pretty scared too. And the fact that the jerk didn't seem to think it was serious was the last straw for her. I now live in Indiana, on a farm where it's nice and flat, and there isn't a tree within a mile of me. And I've never seen the Grassman again, and I hope I never do. All right, my trusty Sass Squad. Well, I hope you enjoyed these 3 encounters as much as I did. Let me know what you think of them in the comments below. Do you or someone you know have an encounter that you would like to hear narrated on this channel? If so, shoot me an email at contact@buckeyebigfoot.com and I'll get it out here for you. If you like what you've heard and want to hear more, hit the like and subscribe button and don't forget the bell to get notifications. Okay, everyone, thanks for hanging in there with me. Reading straight from an email is a little more challenging than reading from a story that I've prepared myself. So thank you. That's it for this Friday's Buckeye Encounter. I'm Nance Warren, and I'll be putting the sass back into Sasquatch until we meet up again Tuesday night for the next non-Buckeye Encounter. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.